Is this the countdown?
Yeah, we can talk in the meantime, but then he'll tell us.
I'm not seeing anything, so I'm just gonna watch Brian until he.
That's the way. That is the way. Yeah, it's a fun thing that we got it going on live now.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
You wanted to be famous.
It's gonna happen today. Okay. Wow. What's that?
It's like the end of the first act in the movie of your life. It's about to take off. Hey everybody, welcome to the Art Fight Podcast. I'm Joe Nolan. I'm here with my co-host Brian Siskind. It's a beautiful day here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're talking to a filmmaker and a artist and a traveler and a concert promoter and a visionary. I'm just going to go ahead and call him a visionary. Stuart Swezey, we're really happy to have you here with us today.
Cool. Well, really good to be here. Yeah.
And Stuart, you're out in LA right now. How's it? It's a beautiful day in LA. It seems like it is from your window there. I can see the light on your face. Beautiful. I want to like make a movie with the light that's on your face right now.
It's all yours. I'm just saying. We got the bandwidth. Don't worry about it. No, yeah, it's really nice. And for us, like a nice day means not excessively hot. So, because that can be kind of a drag, but, in the pandemic, the smog is way down here. It's weird. It doesn't even feel like.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, you go outside and you're like, this light doesn't look right. This is really.
Yeah, it's not as yellow as I want it to be.
Yeah, I kind of like that feeling in my lungs.
Yeah. Breathing.
So Stuart, if we asked you to pick out a particular record that's in your collection behind you, would you know how to find it quickly, or would it take you a while?
No, super disorganized it was at one point alphabetical.
Yeah, right.
Kind of with soundtracks in their own section alphabetically, but that's kind of gone by the wayside. And I have to admit, my vinyl consumption has gone down a lot. But I'm one of those guys, like with comic books and with records, like I can't really part with a lot of them. So
right.
But it was a huge part of my life. So they're really cool. It's just they don't get out and play it as much as they should,
Right. Yeah. I just moved in the last decade, basically. I moved 3 times. And in moving 3 times, every time I had to pack my books up again or pack records up again or any of that kind of media, I was always like everything. It wasn't quite a Marie Kondo situation, but I was definitely like, am I really ever going to read this again? Or do I really identify with this so bad that I'm going to put it in a box and take it with me again? So I did a pretty good job of like, shedding a lot of fat in terms of that kind of stuff. And now that we're in the place we're in now, I've gotten comfortable with the idea that if I get a new book, I've got to get rid of a book. If I get another record, I've got to get rid of a record.
Well,
so I'm trying to just maintain at this point because it's kind of plenty. Between my wife and I, it's kind of plenty.
Well, just imagine adding to that, having been the owner, operator, partner in a bookstore for 10 years. So
that's insane.
It would follow me everywhere.
I love the idea, though. I mean, I've got as somebody who loves books. I mean, I love books more than I love vinyl records, and the idea of running a bookstore, especially the kind of bookstore you ran, would be fantastic. And maybe we will get to that, and we'll talk a bit about your bookstore days as well. But I want people to know right off the top that we're primarily here to sort of get into, the nooks and crannies of your. Really about your philosophy and your process behind all these different things you've done. And the thing that you have going on right now is this new documentary film that you made about really ultimately it's about a whole culture you were a part of. I love the way the movie creates all this context because it's that to me, that's like, it's incredibly important to the event itself. You know what I mean? When you actually are telling us about what you did with this event, it's a very rich story because of the fact that I feel like I understand pretty intimately at this point what was going on with the scene in LA in the early 80s and how that grew and changed and how you grew and changed along with it. But why don't you tell us just a give me your elevator pitch for what this movie's all about.
Well, that's really cool because I mean what you just said is meaningful because for me it wasn't just about these 4 shows or 5 shows, however you want to look at it. But so the short version is the film's called Desolation Center. It was the idea was that it was going to be a nomadic kind of like underground music club where we would put on gigs and wherever we could, rehearsal space, a warehouse, wherever. And then at some point it turned into this concept of taking these, punk rock, industrial culture, underground people out to the middle of the Mojave Desert. And
that was the best part. Like that was where you really took it on. Like, you really jumped right out of the box, I think, at that point.
And I kind of took everything up a notch in terms of like the intensity of the experience. Ended up working with some really great musicians and other kinds of artists, and ended up doing 3 shows in the desert. One on a boat going around the harbor in San Pedro, and the people that we did the shows with were the Minutemen, the Meat Puppets. It was the first West Coast show of Sonic Youth, and it was out in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And Einstürzende Neubauten, which a lot of people can't pronounce, including me, but they're a German group that were at that time playing like power tools and setting off Molotov cocktails. And then another element of it was Survival Research Laboratories, who are best known as these like robotic performance art guys, but they couldn't bring all the robots down, as it turned out. So they ended up bringing explosives, and they were basically the opening act for Einstürzende Neubauten and blowing up refrigerators, and it actually worked. It all tied in sort of especially. And then a little bit of the film is also about how these very small scale bootstrap things that we did led to other things like Burning Man, Lollapalooza, and Coachella in different ways. So, we could trace some of that story as well. But for instance, like Survival Research Laboratories, a lot of the people that learned how to make machine art and do things with fire and things like that ended up early Burning Man people. So there's all these like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing I think was really rad about the documentary, and that really made it feel really timely and in the best possible way, was in the earlier part of the film, again, where you just sort of take us into a lot of rad footage of LA in the 80s, a lot of cool like imagery of like the clubs that were happening then and the people who were performing then. You even interview other folks who I'm sure you knew from that time, in present, you're interviewing them today and they're looking back and saying, this is what it was like, la, la, la. And one of the things I thought was interesting about it was the diversity of the scene and the sort of nonchalant diversity. It was like, it seemed from what the documentary showed that it was just a thing where all these people kind of came together and nobody asked any questions because, well, you're playing music and I'm making art and you're a performer and you're organizing all this and we're just all here and we love it. And so we're just going to do it. And no one's going to wonder about whether girls are allowed or black people are allowed or fat people are allowed or, gay people are allowed. It's just like everybody gets to be here. And, not every revolution is, inclusive. You know what I mean? The Black Panthers were notoriously sexist. Not every art scene is inclusive. The Beat Generation was notoriously sexist,
Yeah.
But the scene there seems like it really was this really incredibly inclusive place, and I think it shows in the quality of all these ideas that come out that that ultimately there are these ideas that do get outside the box and do think of new ways of doing things.
Also, really glad that you brought that up and that came through. And I mean, I think that it's not to say that everybody was all completely woke or all that. It was more just like we're a bunch of weird kids that nobody in your high school liked, and then all of a sudden we got to hang out together and create things. And so therefore you had some really kind of interesting, intense personalities, and people that had all kinds of interests. And then there was also kind of like this older generation, for me anyway, that were maybe people in their late 20s, but the kind of like
the elders.
So that's what Captain Beefheart is about, or whatever. You just start learning all kind of earlier kind of eccentric, cool people from the people that we were hanging out with. But I think of somebody like Chandelier, because I mean he was always there, but super androgynous and gender bending, black guy, that political. But until I really interviewed Chandy, I mean I'd known him all these years. I didn't realize how deep he actually was, and how much was going on in his head. Because a lot of times it'd just be people you'd see at a club. You're like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool experience for me. But I do think that was just true of LA, because LA was already kind of a diverse place. Like you had a lot of Latino people.
Sure.
You had African American people. You had a lot of Asian people. So out of all of those people, they all kind of got it at the same time from what was going on the radio, and started coming into the, Hollywood and places like that. And so we were all kind of bumping up against each other, in a good way.
I think it's interesting too how the premise is really set up to be such a not just an assimilation of people, but also a reconciling of these incredible contrasts, in the sense that you're taking essentially people from the city that are used to communing, if they do at all, in very small spaces in the city, punk clubs, basement, situations, all that kind of stuff that we all kind of grew up with. I love the idea that all of this just gets shot out of a cannon into this expanse, right? And instead of being in sort of the underbelly of the city, now all of a sudden there's limitless space. You feel like a part of the planet. You're reconciling yourself with the elements and the earth, while bringing that idiom and that sort of ideology and all the methodologies with you to then sort of explode it in that space in the Mojave Desert. I find that part of it alone, prior to, I mean, obviously this is the predecessor for all these other, sort of culture festivals, but I take issue with sort of culture festival, right? Or even just culture in general, but I guess the idea just being that, right, any gathering of people that agree on anything is the scariest thing in the world to me. Let me tell you. But it's the kind of thing where that was, and I hate to sort of romance these kind of things, right? In the same way that Woodstock has been in other things, right? Where there's all sides to it, but it was really the last of the unmediated experiences. If that were to happen now in any way, it would never happen the same way. It would never feel the same way, because everybody was jumping, seemingly right into this unknown, like willing to take a trip, get on a bus, and go to sort of the unknown. And there's no real safety. There's no, contact. There's no, living for the gram and like vanity wrapped up in it, right? It's just this unmediated sort of thing that now, it can't happen. And I hate to feel like I'm that grumpy sort of older guy now that's like, well, that, back in my day. But I mean, it really is just by the shape of technology and culture and all things, something that actually cannot ever happen again.
Well, let me say first off that I do think that despite all that, I'm really, really glad people brought cameras.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that people, some people videotaped it. There's people that brought their Sony Walkman. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to make a film out of it.
But the immediacy, right? Yeah.
In our memories. But I do think you're right that everybody having a camera and everybody having access to this, being able to stream it out there and everything does change experience for sure. And I don't know what, kind of something like this would be. We have talked about, particularly my friend Mariska and I, and she was part of the original shows as well. She was a co-producer on the film, and she took a lot of the photos. We're talking about doing it. It won't, I don't want to say it'll be the same, because we're all that many more decades older, and we'd like to have some of the same outlaw spirit, but I think we're gonna have to make some decisions about, like, if we do that, like, what would you do with people's phones, and can you make it so that everybody isn't just standing there
Yep.
that, which I find super annoying, so yeah, I do think there were things about it where you really could get lost back then, and there was no GPS, and you were genuinely like in a life-threatening situation, just from the elements, But I mean, we also, I think, like there's like a lineage to it, even in the sense of like just, Bruce Leisher from Savage Republic was really the one that had this idea. I mean, he knew the dry lake bed, and he took me out there where we did our first show. One of his teachers at UCLA in the art department was Chris Burden, who did all kinds of crazy art things where he, was crucified to a VW and stuff like that. And I think the idea that we weren't going to tell people where they were going, they were just going to get on a school bus and it would end up in the middle of the desert, was kind of in the spirit of all that, that there was an element of risk and like trust and things like that too.
Unmediated spontaneity, as it were, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost a pastime. But the thing too is that I know that I mean, it's no secret. People talk about it, right? Like how much hallucinogenics and everything were sort of a part of this experience, and it's like I when I was young, I would do a lot of those kind of things that I would never do now, but not because I have some new moral fabric. It's because I can't. Right. It's because I can't get away, man. Like I wouldn't have experienced anything as a teenager that was enlightenment as I saw it, had I known that I couldn't fully disappear for a day, even maybe 2 days, where people wouldn't get freaked out. Now it's like if you're gone for 10 minutes, people are gonna wonder where are you and get worried or whatever. If
right.
So if you're gonna have like a massive sort of collection of people dipping into sort of the psychedelic realm and otherwise, I feel like, I don't know, it's being tethered to reality or non-reality, however you look at it. It seems like that there are a lot of interesting sort of differences and challenges. And if you were to reapproach it, I mean, if you were to do it again, it's like, well, it's the same spirit, but like, I've got my Yeti cooler, I've got.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that was because a lot of people that went to these things were not experienced outdoors people.
Yeah.
They're being out late and maybe getting from Hollywood to downtown LA and back, and be able to drive with a few beers, but not like actually dealing with the whole outdoor situation. And that's why we didn't have the whole camping out. I mean, a few people did get there early and leave later, but it's funny. Yeah, the only place you really cut off from all that nowadays is a national park, where they still don't have cell service and stuff like that, which is, it's always kind of a nice feeling where you're like, yeah, I absolutely can't communicate. For me, I don't know, maybe if I was a digital native, I would miss it or something, but
yeah. It's something, I don't really think about it that much until when usually in the springtime for my wife's birthday, we go down to the Gulf Coast. So we go down to basically it's like the closest beach to Nashville. You just drive south until you hit the ocean, right? And when we're down there, just because it's I mean, it's really a pain in the butt to have a phone out at the beach with you, because where do you leave it when you want to go in the water? It's going to get hot if it's out in the sun and all this stuff. So it's actually just easier to leave it inside and not deal with it. But the upshot of that is that I spend most of it every day just reading a book or staring at the ocean or taking a nap, and at the end of doing that for like a week, you really do know that you can tell there's a difference. You can tell that there's you're sort of more aware of what's happening around you, because you're significantly less distracted than you are when it's just constantly there for you to indulge in all this technology.
Yeah. I mean,
all true.
I'm just saying.
In the course of, digitally releasing a film, like right now, I mean, really in the midst of all that sort of anxiety of even doing this with you guys, I'm like, I have to be there to get on the Skype. Now it feels really natural and it's like no big deal, but there's a certain amount of just constantly being in touch and making sure things go right and stuff. It's like production, but I think that there it is a good feeling when you can just be with a group of people or whatever, and it's just that's it. That's your world. That's your reality. And the desert, I mean, is I think part of my idea was that I felt like the desert was almost like another planet. It just felt so like austere and things like that. So I felt like certain aspects of psychedelia in the music lent themselves to that sort of spaciness and things like that. So, but I mean, it could be anywhere. I don't want to say like, oh, this is about the California desert, because really, I mean, there's all kinds of strange environments.
Right.
People do shows in volcanoes and whatever.
Right. One of the things that I liked about the documentary, there was a quote from you in the documentary. First of all, too, I also really liked the way that I felt that you sort of were not really the subject, but you were like the protagonist in a way of the documentary. But I felt it didn't bother me in the way it does a lot of times when it feels like the director is overtly putting themselves in the film and things like that. To me, it felt really natural when you were on the screen, and obviously necessary because you're the one to sort of lead us through this story. But one thing that you said really toward the beginning, almost like the introduction of the movie, was you talked about the idea that these early experiences that you had in the LA scene with all these artists and all these musicians and stuff, that you began to think about, producing these shows as an art form in and of itself, So could you talk a little bit about that? Like, how did you start to see that as like something more than just administrative, and actually see it as like creating this, curating this, expression?
Yeah. Again, thank you, for getting all that. And it was,
it's pretty clear. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
well done, man. I'm not bringing particular insights to this. I think that's all right there in the movie for everybody to see.
in that there was one show and one person that I talked about that I think was an example of it, which was Throbbing Gristle.
Oh, right, yeah.
They were, for the people that are not familiar with them. I mean, they were a very kind of taboo-breaking, noisy, intense group from England, but purely
Right.
electronic. They weren't really, they were punk in every way, but using Kraftwerk's instruments or whatever. And
Right, yeah.
so
We just and Genesis Peorage just passed away not too long ago.
Yeah. And so, and there was a guy that I met who became a good friend, who actually went to I think most of the shows, maybe all of the ones that are in the film, named Michael Shepard. And he was the first person to bring Throbbing Gristle to Los Angeles. And he did a show up in San Francisco too. And he did all kinds of sort of cool acts, but it was also it was something about the way they presented themselves in this place that was the Culver City Veterans Auditorium, where you could have seen any number of bands there, but they would have been like your local rock bands or whatever, and so seeing them there just felt like this is so wrong, but it's so right, And so then I met Michael, just record shopping somewhere, and I was like, wow, how did you do that? How did you get them to play in the Culver City? And he started telling me all this stuff, and then he kind of took me around and showed me how to sell tickets at the record stores and get the cash in order to pay for the things you had to pay for. And so I just, again, like, there was just certain people, like another person that was in the film, Johanna Wendt, who was a performance artist, did these really crazy shows that, with weird costumes and giant, phalluses and a severed pig's head and all this stuff. But it was always like opening for a band, like the Minutemen or something, So It was like, I just started to see that there was more than one way to present things and more than one way to sort of combine things. And so I just started feeling like this whole club thing, because in high school, I started going up to see bands at clubs, and in LA, it was usually the Sunset Strip. It just started to feel like you could only go so far within that environment. So
Right.
It was partly about the music and partly about trying to change the setting. I don't know why I took it on myself, but I guess I'm just not, I never really felt like the world needed my band. You know what I mean? It was more like, what could I do that would contribute to this whole scene? And back then there was a lot of really good zines being published that were, really artistic. There was great photography, great design of the record cover. So everything just felt like somebody was doing something with this music, but it wasn't really just all about, rock and roll, basically. Mm-hmm. So I just thought, why not make the promoting part of it as creative as the rest of what was going on.
Yeah, I love that, man.
So there's also this tendency I see where you're very much sort of a cultivator of disparate elements, right? I think that there's some people that have a particular gift, right? I don't know if you can cook, maybe not, I don't know, but it just seems
getting better.
Yeah, right. But I think that there's people that have that gift, and when you start to really focus that sort of your nature in that way on a film project like this, I feel like that's got to be sort of the strength that you have to have when you're dealing with the assembly, essentially, of archival film and photography and this big broad story with so many sort of players and important figures to sort of touch on in whatever way you feel like will lend to this larger complexion. And there's a lot of influential people that came from all of this that are still affecting culture in a very intense way now. But you had this ability, I think, to put this together in a way that I think is it's kind of confounding to me. I mean, I'm a filmmaker also, and if I'm dealing with just a bunch of footage alone, not necessarily contending with archives and trying to get the transcriptions and like whatever, all the things that you need to do from a technical sort of filmmaking standpoint to be able to organize a story in the idiom that is now the feature-length documentary, which, by the way, I have a follow-up question about that in terms of the sort of episodic style, right? But anyway, tell us a little bit about like sort of your process and how perhaps like the synthesis of a lot of different ingredients was either a challenge or actually came quite naturally, or that you almost wanted to jump off a bridge, or how did that go for you?
Well, some or all of the above. Yeah, I mean, when you would have asked me, but I do think that like I had done a lot of sort of different but related things before I started on the film. So our Amok Books was conceived of by, and not just me, but it was a group of sort of a collective, as a Dada collage that was also a book catalog. So that's really like a fucked up thing to take on, but at the same time, it was the only way we could really express what we wanted and also have something practical. Like, here's these cool, weird books, So I was used to sort of archival things and scanning things in and all that. Produced a documentary that my friend John Reese did about rave culture and sort of that scene in the late 90s. I think that I was really lucky to work with some people that had a ton of experience with this kind of stuff. I mean, my editor, Tyler Hubby, he's also a documentary filmmaker. And when I saw the film that he made about this sound artist guy, Tony Conrad, I was like, God, I could just get Tyler to do this. But Tyler had also done like a number of music docs by that time. He edited The Devil and Daniel Johnston and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
So
talk about archives.
So, like through Tyler, I met a lot of really interesting people. Through John, who came back as a consulting producer, I met people, and also put in a lot of time working in TV, which sounds like kind of the opposite. But my particular job a lot of the time was development. So that meant that they gave you like no money, and you just had to somehow like make a little tape that would look like the show you were trying to sell. And that was a good discipline for me, because a lot of times I was like a one-man band filming, which I didn't want to do that for this, but I did learn sort of very low budget production techniques, and I met, really talented. One of the DPs, Sandra, was somebody that, we did a reality sizzle reel together before that and stuff. So I think I spent a lot of time kind of doing related things. And then I also maybe because I was in the middle of this particular story, it made me know the right questions to ask people and the right kind of what did I want to get out of them and things like that. So Not to say that sometimes, it didn't always, if you hadn't seen somebody in 35 years, like with Blixa Bargeld, could have gone any number of ways, but it ended up, I thought he had a lot of really great insights, but at the beginning, he was a little bit like, I don't remember you, and I don't even remember how I got to the desert. Those.
I wasn't even there, man. That's awesome.
You had a follow-up question, Brian.
Well, I guess I was just curious about, I feel like that there is sort of this dilemma now where, this sort of idea of all eggs in one basket, right? I'm going to make this one feature-length thing, right? Versus maybe something that's, split up, and we're in the age now where people will binge a 10-hour documentary in one weekend. As much as we have the attention spans of goldfish now, and we're all becoming like sort of idiots, we're also becoming highly tolerant to just long form binging and all that. So I guess I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like you would have had the challenge of just, I've got so much material here that, and so many disparate storylines that I could go down and explore and extrapolate out. And I'm sure you had a pretty good challenge of trying to sort of curtail or contain that, or get to the most essential things. And so sometimes the constraint, air quotes, of say a single assertion of a film is a good thing. Like whatever it is, it's got to fit in this sort of mold. Versus, I guess I'm just curious if you were tempted at any point, or compelled to consider in some way like another avenue of kind of breaking it up or doing it in a different format.
I never really did. I think I do love the like feature length doc, and I wanted to make one, so for me, it was like, I'm going to bring it in at 90 minutes, and I'm going to try to tell this whole story. And that's where it was helpful to be bouncing it off of Tyler, because, he could sort of, he was brutal, he's just like, I don't care that you love that person and they're your friend, or they're out. It's kind of, oh, shit. All right.
Yeah. You got to have somebody like that around.
In the interest of storytelling, and so we worked well together, I think. And then as far as making it episodic, I think it was more like I realized that like some of these interviews, like with Mark Pauline, I mean, I got so much of his story from up to the moment where he did that desert show. It's almost like this archive of underground West Coast, in particular, culture, but also, I mean, Berlin people, and, so I do think there was this idea maybe that I could, at some point, turn it into something where, people could just experience all the things that led up to it and get to know these people in a more in-depth way. But there just hasn't really been time to do all that. I mean, I think, but as far as making it episodic, one idea that I had was that, it's almost like this is a particular point in time in a place, from 83 to 86 or whatever. And that there are other places and points of time and other, like, where did Buto start in Japan and when did it end or whatever, you know what I mean? Or just all kinds of different, that was what I thought maybe it could be a kind of a template for talking about underground culture in different places,
I think the word underground culture is interesting, and I think one of the things that I admired about you when I saw the movie was the fact that you grew up in LA, so that was just by default. You were in LA in the early '80s when, like, you show footage and it's like, just kind of a wasteland downtown and things like this. Not that dissimilar to what was going on in New York. Not quite as apocalyptic as what we see in, like, Basquiat documentaries, but rather like that, and a place that was sort of ripe for artists and musicians and stuff to sort of take over spaces and reimagine culture and all this kind of stuff. But then shortly, I guess was it right after you did the first concert in the desert, you went to Berlin? Is that how it was?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, what I did was I did this one desert show with Savage Republic and the Minutemen, and then I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next, so I like quit my job, and I was backpacking in Europe with a Euro pass, and then I ended up in Berlin. And when I got there, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I want to stay here, but I couldn't really figure out, what the hell I was doing. But I met a lot of really interesting people. I had a few like, you should talk to this person or that, and people let me couch surf and things like that. So I just kind of fell into that scene, and that was it was super different than LA, but there was something really inspiring about all these artists and people. Back then in Germany, it was surrounded by, I didn't really realize until I got there. I thought there was like a wall, like when we drive down to Mexico, but it's actually the wall surrounded the whole place. And so they had a hard time getting people to live there. So if you didn't want to be in the army, you didn't want to be drafted. I mean, it wasn't like that in the Vietnam War, but everybody was supposed to go in the army. If you lived in Berlin, you're okay. You could just get out of the whole thing. So it kind of attracted all kinds of alternative people. And
yeah, see, that's rad. And it's interesting to me because, like, in the last 10 or 15 years, let's say, Berlin has become like the new Portland or something, right? Like everybody's wanted to go to Berlin. It was cheap. There was all creative people there. All these artists were moving there and living there. There's a bunch of bands I know of that moved there, and they're still based in Berlin now. And now it's probably a place that's much more harder to find that underground scene in, to find that cheap place to live in and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like there's something so important about like the living in these places where there's just nothing going on and no reason to stay. And then you can like project all this imagination onto it. You know what I'm saying? Where when you live in a place that's, everybody wants to be there and there's plenty of things to do and all these things are happening and you can't be poor and spend your time making art there because it's too expensive to be there. It chokes that out. You know what I mean? And I don't know if I have a question exactly.
Quality of life. Quality of life.
Yeah. When you have to sort of create quality of life, it's
rent
better.
Or the not paying of rent or whatever is really important because not the musical, but the idea that you have time to, actually do creative stuff or just screw up and do things that don't make any sense. And, I tried that, and that's what LA felt like back then. If you were willing to sort of get away from the more, expensive, nice parts of town, you could live cheap. And so that's, again, like you're talking about New York in the 70s, one of the things one of my paid gigs was researching that whole time period for somebody that wanted to make a film. And I really learned about how, that, whatever the East Village, Lower East Side, it wasn't like a place people wanted to be, Right. And I think that now you look back on it, you're like, wow, so much creativity, whatever. But a lot of that is just a few people that are really determined.
Yeah, the frontier, as it were, back then, Yeah. I mean, even when I lived in New York in the mid '90s, nobody went to Williamsburg or whatever. Very few people had the sort of nerve to kind of be there, and the ones that there were kind of like, "Ooh, you live in Williamsburg." Every era has that whole thing. I mean, I don't know what the next frontier is. It's probably somewhere in the middle of the country. It's going to be somewhere where there's lots of
Detroit. I guess maybe it's Detroit over already. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I liked going there. I went there to screen Desolation Center and been there a few different times. And I still think that has an element of that. But it's hard.
Right.
I would move there.
I'm from Detroit originally, and so I get up there. I mean, I was just up there at Christmas time, So I think Detroit's very weird, man, because it's like, Detroit crashed about as hard as a place can crash. It's very few cities actually totally go bankrupt like the way Detroit did, And when you go to Detroit now, you still see just blocks and blocks of empty buildings and all this kind of stuff. But you also see all these other things where Detroit didn't sort of make this leap like all these other cities made it. It's now, when it's coming back, all of a sudden it's like, abandoned buildings and artisanal milkshakes.
Yeah,
right. Abandoned buildings and this kind of thing. So I think there's interesting things happening there. And my nephew lives in Detroit, and he's there, part of the electronic music scene in Detroit right now. And there's some really cool things that seem to be happening. But I really don't have a grasp on is the rent still affordable or what's going on? With the quality of life.
Autonomous
zones.
I
just know from John Locke, exactly. Who's in the film, who started one of the people that started the Cacophony Society and Burning Man, he bought a house in Detroit for like $10,000,
wow.
just because he's like, how could I not do that? You know, and so, but that was a few years back. I'm sure everything's
Sure.
I don't know. The whole world is going to be different when we all come out of, you know.
Yeah, we have no
quarantine.
idea yet. Yeah. Hey,
But you know, I do think that there's always that. Now there's the whole gentrification thing too. So you don't want to be like just the foot soldiers of that either. You know. So.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to avoid it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a funny thing, but I read about it all the time, and I hear people talk about it all the time. But it's like, of course, the creative class is going to be the group of people that are willing to put up with all the things other people aren't, because of the fact that that economic trade-off of, I can live here cheap and I can afford to paint, you know, or I can live here cheap and I can afford to run my band, you know, or whatever it is, you know, they're always going to be willing to do that. And the great value of that creative work is that it really does make something in the middle of nothing that everyone else wants to be a part of, until they price the artists out again, and then they have to move to Williamsburg.
Yeah,
you know?
It all keeps happening. Hey, I was gonna say also, you know, how is your Stuart, your reconciliation with the past, right? In terms of nostalgia, right? Like, at least from my experience, I feel embattled by that sometimes, because I want to honor things of the past, but at the same time, I feel like if I go too deep, then I'm living in the past, or I'm not able to make a turn enough to sort of get away from it. And it's hard not to romance things. You know, I'm glad you have I forget the fellow's name you mentioned, but the guy that's like, I don't give a shit about this person or that. Like, just because you liked this doesn't mean that anybody else is going to care about this in the film. At least you had like some people to sort of govern maybe your personal sensibilities, but just in a broader sense, as a human being, and you're it takes a hell of a long time to make a film like what you've made. And it's a huge investment. And whenever you're doing that, I mean, ultimately any filmmaker is dealing in the past, because that's the nature of the medium. You're capturing something and reflecting it. But in your case, right, like, it's really a you know, trying to sort of hold up this kind of harbinger and this very special thing. How did you reconcile the sort of the nostalgia versus sort of remaining kind of functionally not attached at the same time?
Well, I think I felt like I don't want it to be nostalgia.
Yeah.
And I also felt like, you know, on a personal kind of like psychic level, I got a lot of reward out of getting to back into this period of my life, and meeting people that were important then, or that were involved, and getting this sort of 360-degree view of what we were all doing, and then seeing these images that I didn't know were out there. So it was continually kind of inspiring. Like, and so I didn't want to, and this is, I mean, when I was a kid in the 60s, you know, there was Woodstock, right? And I always felt like we were kind of like the lame 70s people that were in the shadow of all that. So we had the Eagles instead of, you know, Jimi Hendrix or whatever. And so I really didn't want to have that holier than thou kind of superior attitude with this. And so what I kind of thought would make sense is to just tell the story in somewhat of an unvarnished way, not get too pretentious with it, and let the things speak for themselves. And so that was definitely a conscious decision. And to be kind of, you know, it's kind of an in-between period, you know, it's not like 1977, 78 punk. It's not like the indie, you know, boom that happened afterward. But what I liked about it is that everybody was kind of like doing things for the right reasons, and no one was really expecting to make any big financial, you know, return out of it at that time or anything. So, you know, in a way, I was able to present this sort of idealistic thing and be true to that, you know. So I guess, you know, you can't, I mean, there's kind of like, I know when I first got into punk, I was like, well, there's this thing called punk rock, and it happened in the 60s, and I have to learn about the Seeds and the Question Mark and the Mysterians, and, you know, 13th Floor Elevators. So, you know, there's always that like digging into whatever came before. And so I don't feel too bad in the sense of like, yeah, not everybody's going to have been that generation. And so when people see it and they're in their 20s and they get something out of it, to me, that's really rewarding. I mean, that's, you know, what I would hope.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I said when we first started talking, you know, I think one of the things I really liked about the documentary was, I mean, it was full of names and people and bands and everything else that I was aware of, but it was also full of stuff that I didn't know about, obscure things that I'm glad I know about now. And I'm glad that I have a better understanding of all that stuff. And frankly, stuff makes more sense to me now. Especially like there's a lot of things, like at one point you talk about the concert. What was it? It was at Black Flag and the Minutemen opening up for the Ramones, right? And all that, and like I always think about like this weird separation between East Coast punks and West Coast punks. You know what I mean? And maybe that's something that happens eventually, but to see that kind of a concert happening, and that hilarious radio announcement that they make, that's really hilarious. And I thought that was really interesting too, because that was another thing about the documentary, is just because of the nature of the subject. You are, once again, talking about technology, you're getting into this thing where you're seeing all this nuts and bolts of how people, were creative about promoting their shows back before they could just invite people on Facebook.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like, what's more basic than a radio ad for a concert, right? Yeah. On a rock station. But they managed to make it into this completely subversive, fuck you to the LAPD, right, way before NWA. That was amazing. And I didn't even, back then it was kind of like, yeah, of course Black Flag's going to do that, fuck that. But, now I look at it like, that's genius, and that was out on the airwaves and not censored. It's still amazing, and no wonder they showed up, in force with the Riot Squad at that gig,
right,
and many other ones. But that's what's been interesting, living through the last few weeks, is just, people kind of wrapping their head around, well, what is this whole police brutality thing, and why does all this violence happen around them, and what can we do about that? And that was an element of the film too, which we got used to it, as white, whatever, privileged, and in many cases suburban kids. But a lot of people weren't, which we also point out in the film. But also, it's like you kind of start to see your local police force in a very different light, when you're in those situations,
Yeah, well, the LAPD, of course, is notorious, and it's interesting to see, that even back then they were like that, and then Rodney King, they're like that, and now they're still like that. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's I mean. It's time for us to all come to grips with this problem. You know what I mean? Because it's perennial.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great book called City of Quartz that I read. I forget when it came out. Sometime I think in the 90s, and it talks about how the LAPD used Vietnam strategic Hamlet, containment occupation type strategies in South Central. And pretty much everywhere else, but that whole idea that they're an occupying force, it sounds kind of overblown, but the fact is that's what they were doing. That was their manual, and I think that has to change now, somehow.
Yeah, Joe. Joe, I noticed the other day. Joe, I don't know if you know this, but I follow you on social media.
Oh, great!
It's great.
Maybe I'll follow you back, Brian.
Thanks. Yeah, think about it. Just think about it. You can't even fucking see me. So, no, but this is it's like drug war. Oh yeah. You want to talk about like the time of Desolation Center and all that? I mean, that was the sort of that sort of dirtiest part of the Reagan era. So you got this kind of parallel society of this supposed altruism based in consumption was really perfectly married at that time. Like society and things were getting really, pretty fake and pretty veneered. And then that was sort of like the final strains, I think, of where like basically they just launched the drug war in such a way that it became like, okay, well now we're gonna have to have militarized police because and this is a perfect system. Oh wait, we can also. Oh, why don't we look towards privatizing prisons along the way? And then, wait a minute. Yeah. Like, this is actually an ecosystem that works perfectly because we can kind of get them going in and get them going out. It's like being an OBGYN and a funeral director at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And then you also have the capacity for creating a labor force out of people incarcerated. And now all of a sudden we're back in the antebellum South throughout the whole country.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, did you ever meet D. Boone?
I did.
Sorry,
I mean,
that was just sorry, that was.
yeah. Well, we're getting political, right? Yeah. I mean, D. Boone was somebody out of all, I'd say many of the people in the film I knew, but D. Boone was somebody that I really was friends with, and like it, from the beginning, kind of was down for whatever we wanted to do. I mean, we put on some small Desolation Center shows with the Minutemen, but when I said, "Hey, you want to play out in the middle of the desert?" Sure, yeah, like no questions asked, and just to, yeah. I mean, I don't want to like do some kind of like gee, there'll never be another one like that. But it's really true. He's just an amazing guy, so smart, and could really play his instrument, but like super down to earth and always aware. Just like when I see somebody like that came out of a really kind of blue collar, background, and just always attuned to art. Always bringing it in somehow or other in whether he was painting, drawing, lyrics, music. Just so cool, and still could still do construction during the day, or whatever.
Yeah, that's rad. I think one thing I think is interesting about the the whole DIY thing. To me, a lot of it has to do with education. A lot of it has to do with access to money. A lot of it has to do with that blue collar culture that you're mentioning right now. And I think that there's something that's so, I mean, it's almost like there's such an extra presence to things that are done by a collective of people who are just putting together what they've got in the most creative way they can possibly do it. And they're spending all the sweat equity they can possibly spend to make it as special as possible. And you can just tell the difference when you're at a concert like that, or an art event like that, or an exhibition like that, or something, versus when you go to the other version where it's like, no, it's all well-funded, professional, da, 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 da. And sometimes those things can also be rewarding and interesting, and they have a place. But there's a huge difference between those two things, and I don't know that you can always quantify what that intangible thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of it is just bringing your experience to it also, and if your experience is only art school, then you don't have a lot to bring to the subject, let's say. Mm-hmm. But there's other people that kind of have come up through all kinds of situations, and they're going to have very different perspectives. But yeah, I think that kind of like work ethic was something that Black Flag and the Minutemen had. Right. That was a different thing than sort of the UK punk thing, where it's like, I mean, I think a lot of people, feel like, oh, musicians should just be like, drinking and hanging out and whatever. I mean, that's all true, but, or fun. But I mean, what I saw was guys who would get up in the morning and really like start making flyers, or or Black Flag would be rehearsing 4 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, and so I think that's something that maybe that's a little secret that people should tell artists when they're starting out. Like, hard work is really important, and it will actually make a difference, and I think it gives you more like a sort of a basis where you can be a little bit more like, yeah, I don't care if you like this or you don't like it, because like, this is my thing and I did it myself, even a group of people or whatever.
No, I like that a lot. And I think it would possibly keep a lot of other people away from the arts, because I think there's a lot of people who are cluttering up the space, and they don't have that kind of a work ethic. You know what I mean? And they're there because they think it's easy and it's not hard work, and they don't want to put in that hard work, and sometimes those people do great stuff too. It just depends. But I really do think it's important for people to understand that it's like you say, it's like, people having talent is a big part of it, but people having talent and then dedicating themselves to those talents and putting in the time and the effort and sacrificing other things to make room for that in their lives, that's where the art happens. And I think those working class kids, they grow up in a world where they see those examples. Even if they're not seeing their mom and dad painting every day, they're seeing them put in the hard work. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like, it'd be great if everything was just easy, but unfortunately, to do something cool, you got to put the hard work in.
Brian, that's a quote. You're going to clip that quote out for the week.
Yeah, I'll clip it out. No, I mean,
Instagram.
It's an endless refrain. I mean, like the idea that I think a lot of artists overcomplicate. A lot of people make money off of this, right? Like, who the hell doesn't have a master class now? Or God, like some friends of mine were teasing earlier, just about we should make a master class about how to create a master class, because then we can just get rich, But ultimately, this idea that I saw Tony Williams, the great drummer, wants to do a drum clinic, and people were asking him all these technical questions about how he played, and somebody asked him, how did you develop your ride cymbal technique? And he was actually that's not what happened. Somebody said, I noticed you were playing like 7/4 with your right hand, and they were giving those technical, and he was like, he kept doing this, but he kept saying like, okay, what you're really asking is, how did I develop my ride cymbal technique? So I'll just tell you. He's like, what I did is I took all of my other drums, except for my ride cymbal. I took every drum cymbals, everything else, and put them away. And then I just sat there with my ride cymbal, and I just played that for 6, 7, 8 hours a day with just the ride cymbal. And after I'd done that for a long time, I developed my ride cymbal technique.
Yeah. I love those Fela records, by the way. He's the best.
Which records?
Tony Williams, was he not the guy that played on the Fela Kuti record?
No, you're thinking of oh my God, why am I not thinking about it?
He died recently. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. But Tony Williams played with Miles Davis when he was like 16 years old. He had to like he had to grow a mustache just so he could sneak into the clubs to play with Miles when he was like 16, but ended up being sort of legend. But yes, yeah. So but I love all the Afrobeat stuff too. Another Tony, and equally as compelling. But anyway, I do
Tony Allen.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we're all
and the Afro
messengers.
Getting old, guys. Yeah. But it is interesting how people, I think, convolute how difficult things can be. But it is hard though. Like if you're riding a bike down the road and then and you're on a big hill and somebody just drives by, they're in a car, they're putting forth no effort, and you're just grinding up this hill, and you can't afford a car. It's kind of you're forced to just reconcile that work ethic right then and there. And I think if you've had the ability to bypass all those things for fortune or luck or whatever it is, you don't get made of certain things that I think do amount to that intangible you're talking about, Joe. It's like this point of utter resonance and undeniable authenticity that people just emanate through what they do because they're so just completely connected to it.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I also think, that I like what you said earlier, Stuart, about the gentleman who sort of took you under his wing and showed you the ropes of how you actually put a show together and how you promote it and all that stuff. And I was actually thinking about this just the other day. I've got a number of friends who are like, their day job is being an arts educator of one kind or another. And I've never done anything like that, but I've done community art projects where you're putting people in a room and you're empowering them to do the creativity. And well, for a lot of people, they've never been in that situation before. So there's an educational, pedagogical thing happening in that environment. And of course, there's always in the fine arts, there's a long tradition going all the way back to the medieval times of the master and the apprentice and all this kind of stuff. How much of that stuff, do you feel connected to now? I mean, are you going to be somebody who's going to be working with younger people and help finding a way to sort of inform them of all the weird stuff you've done and help them learn how to be better weirdos?
Yeah. Okay. I love the way you guys ask these questions, and I want to answer this other part that you said, but
part you want.
Well, no, it's just funny to me that the same person that I'm talking about also had a terrible reputation for not paying people and borrowing money, and people never getting it back, and so it was definitely a mixed bag. But I did learn some stuff from him, and I tried to avoid that. But as far as what I found is that there are younger people who want to do site-specific things with music and are doing it, and they've sort of found out about the film, and then COVID hit. You know what I mean? But I think that coming out of this, I'd love to work with people that want to do cool, weird events with interesting music in unusual locations, and even if it was more as just kind of like here's how I would go about that, rather than taking on all the stress.
Right. Even as like a mentor advisor kind of thing.
But also, like, if I do a new desert show like we were talking about, there's definitely some people that I know now from having made the film that can help me with finding some younger musicians that are doing interesting work that I feel like is in the spirit of Desolation Center.
Rad.
And not so much only like had to be somebody that was there in 1984, because I think that would be nostalgic, so I think there's a lot of sort of younger people that are able to sort of process all the stuff that, because there's so much media coming at you and so much information. I mean, back when I was doing these shows, I mean, if you had one book that was actually insightful, like for me it was the Industrial Culture Handbook that Research did. That was a big deal, and you'd read it over and over again.
I love Research. Research was amazing.
Yeah, but now they have to sift through like too much information. But at the same time, I think people are a little. I think people are going to come out of this period a little bit wary of the whole sort of commodified festival thing and want to do. And so I feel like it's a good time to get this film to a wider audience, that maybe wouldn't see it only playing at film festivals or theaters or things like that.
Absolutely, the opposite of Fire Fest, right? I mean, you've got to be like, wow, I was waiting for the car accident, and there it was, But
that's still, I do love a good train wreck, and those documentaries. Yeah, it was pretty fun to watch.
Competing documentaries about the same failed festival. I mean, people were racing to tell that horror story, But it really, the culmination of vanity and a lot of things led to that, But speaking of vanity, maybe you can tell us where we can learn more about you, where we can follow you, how we can get the film in our eyeballs, all of that stuff.
Okay, great. So basically, Desolation Center is the name of the film. It's our website. There's a trailer. There's a lot of information, about the film. And we're going to be streaming through a bunch of different platforms next week, starting on Tuesday. And it would be great if somebody that was watching this wanted to go to Apple TV, which is basically the same as iTunes, because apparently we're having a whole contest promotion thing, so you can win a lot of cool Desolation Center swag, and we'll send you a sticker and a button and stuff like that, just for pre-ordering it. But as far as my book publishing goes, it's Amok Books, AMOK books.com. I don't really have like a personal kind of website thing going, but those are the two things that I've been doing, and you can get a lot of info from both of those.
Yeah, we'll put everything in the show notes for everybody too, so people are not required to remember what you just said, but that's important to know. So Apple TV is the place to go ahead of time to get the promo swag.
Yeah, get the promo swag, and you can enter a competition for all of the cool Desolation Center gear, which and things that Bruce Leischer, who's in the film from Savage Republic, designed a lot of it, and he does his own letterpress thing. So we have these art cards that he made. Just lots of cool stuff, and also it helps us. It helps me as a filmmaker, apparently, that if people pre-order, Apple notices it, whatever. So I'm told. So
yeah,
go for it.
And lastly, I just want to ask, what is your home address so that we know where to go to shop for all the books and the records behind you that you're desperately needing to unload?
My home address came up on a Zoom, but it was called Zoom bombing. It wasn't really that fun. I mean, it was okay, but they also had Nazi marching music going and other things.
That's crazy, man.
So yeah, but
so that's a no.
Yeah.
That's a no, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I want myself. Yeah,
Are you on social media personally?
yeah. I'm on Facebook and I pretty active with that. But yes, all that stuff.
You can be found. Well, yeah, good to know. Yeah, but I was on a panel discussion about Muhammad Ali on the fourth anniversary, uh, and it got Zoom bombed by exactly the same characters. So that was just the contrast was astounding.
Yeah, it was kind of it was almost on cue because the Byron Coley, who was the guy who was doing our moderating, so well, it wasn't always so great at those punk shows. There's those Huntington Beach Nazis, and I'm just like, boom.
Oh my God.
Cue the Nazis.
Cue the Nazis.
All right, Joe, you want to take us out?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll tell people if you guys are in Nashville and you're listening to this show, the virtual art crawl that they were going to do at the beginning of June has been postponed to this Saturday. So it will be Saturday the 20th. If you go to the Nashville Nashville Gallery Association YouTube page at 6 p.m. You'll find the next video, and basically you can do a virtual crawl through all the different galleries that are participating just by watching this video that they've edited together from all of their, various presentations. So that'll be this Saturday, the 20th.
Very cool. Well, I mean, Stuart, I wish we had more time to talk, but what we'll do is we'll just have you on like in just like a week or two, and then we'll just keep doing.
No, thanks, you guys. I feel like kindred spirits, and it's been a blast. And so
100%, man.
People that that you never met in your life that see the film and get it, and so much obliged for having me on.
You got it. So everybody, check the show notes for all the information. Make sure you check out Desolation Center. So guys, I'm gonna wind it out, and then hang loose. We'll do a little green room hang after.
All right. Cool.
And there won't be any booze or anything, but I
unless you got
that's right. I have my American Prohibition Museum cup.
There you go.
All right, but thanks everybody for listening. Make sure you do all the subscribe-y things and all the pushing the things that vote for us or help us or whatever, because we've been sort of moving after 2+ years of doing an audio only podcast. We're now into the video realm, and so we're having to sort of transition our audience. So if you're listening, we're on the YouTubes and all the other places now. So come find us. And if you're on YouTube watching it and you're like, I really don't want to look at this, I'd rather just listen. Well, then you can go find us that way too. So,
like us first and subscribe, and then mute us and walk away.
Something for everybody. Show your resistance. Anyway, but again, Stuart, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you on the other side. And are we out? Yes, we're gonna go out now. Hang loose. Thanks, everybody.